Our scripture from Hebrews 2 asks a question, doesn't it? It's an interesting question. It's actually a question that really can't be answered, isn't it? How shall we escape? And if you stop right there, the question is answerable. But then the next word is an if. How shall we escape if? A qualifier, right? A word of condition. The word if appears 1,595 times in the Bible, and there's a lot of questions that say, you do this if I do that. Or this condition will occur if that condition happens. Like you are the sweepstakes winner if you have the matching ticket, right? You get that in the mail? Of course, you don't have the matching ticket, do you? But the question says, how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? And the question is really unanswerable, isn't it? There's no answer for that question, right? Because the answer is, we shall not escape if we neglect so great a salvation. Eric Weiss. How many of you have heard of Eric Weiss? Eric Weiss he was perhaps the greatest escape artist in the 1900s. If you haven't heard of him, maybe it's because he changed his name. As a young teenager, he was impressed by a man by the name of Robert Houdin. And so he changed his name to Harry Houdini. And Harry Houdini was an incredible actor, a magician, escape artist, stuntman, and he had an incredible career. In fact, he would actually offer rewards for anybody who could successfully restrain him. He tried handcuffs, leg irons. You put him in leg irons and handcuffs, straight jackets. You've probably seen pictures of Harry Houdini in a straight jacket. If you get on YouTube, you can punch in Harry Houdini and watch him wiggle his way out of a straight jacket. He would go into jails. You could incarcerate him in a jail, get right out of there. He had an act called the mail pouch escape. Crates, paper bag, a giant paper bag. He could get out of that paper bag without tearing it. Giant football, milk can, and his famous Chinese torture cell. And oftentimes he would sort of play with his audiences. They would throw him in this cage, tie him up in the cage, throw him in the water, and with photographers there and everybody watching, he would escape, and then he would come up and swim up under the dock and wait there for a while until they were sure he was dead and drowning in there. And they were getting real concerned. Then he'd finally go back up and pop out and gasp, after about 30 minutes. And people were like, oh, and he would make it really dramatic. With Harry Houdini, he would never give them a clue or a sign as to how he escaped from all these. He never gave anybody a clue. The only clue that he gave them, he says that one of his secrets was his great strength. He would work out. He was in a very good physical condition. He worked out, and he would hold his breath in the bath that he practiced in the bubble bath. He would go under, and he could hold his breath for 4 minutes under the water. How many minutes? Have you ever tried to hold your breath for a long time? I've gone up to 3 once back when I was swimming, but 4, it's just like, you get lightheaded after 2.5 or 3, and you're like, your lungs are about collapsing on themselves. But the more you do it, the more you can do it longer. And he would work out. He died on Halloween Day on 1926, October 31, 1926, from a stomach punch. It ruptured, it aggravated appendicitis condition he had. What he would do is he would work out, he had these great stomach muscles, and he would invite the audience to come and punch him. And he says, just give it your best shot. You just stand right there and people would just rear back and just let him have it, right in the stomach. And that didn't hurt, He had these stomach muscles. But one time a fellow punched him when he wasn't ready. If you're going to get punched like that, you got to be ready. You got to have your stomach muscles. I don't need it any time, but if I was Harry Houdini, you got to flex those tummy muscles so you can take it. It's a little bit easier to handle. But one time he wasn't ready and he got punched, and then later he died from that punch. He died on Halloween Day. Eventually, he was unable to make his escape. He trusted in his own strength, and eventually it got the best of him, and he lost. Now, our message today is called Escape. Now, as Christians, we are in a similar situation. As Christians, we're born into sin, the world of sin, the condition of sin. We're born in this world without any choice, aren't we? And we're asked to do what is impossible, and that is escape. You live your 70 years or 60 years or 70, and then that's it. Unless you can find the escape route, how to get out. How to plan your escape route. A Christian is born in sin, asked to do the impossible. Escape is imperative. And the Bible has many stories about escapes, doesn't it? For instance, the Israelites escaping out of Egypt. Wasn't that an incredible escape? There was David hiding from King Saul. You remember those stories? Some of my favorite stories as a kid were King Saul chasing David in the woods, and he was out there in the caves. And when he would be backed into a corner or right where he was surrounded or whatever, he'd get away. Something miraculous would always happen. There was, of course, Noah in the ark escaping off this earth, the flood. And then there was one of my favorites, Jesus. Remember Jesus on the Nazareth cliff? He went to preach to his hometown, didn't he? And they didn't like his sermon very much, and so they responded by yelling at him and yanking him out of the temple or out of the synagogue and pushing him up to the brow of a cliff. And they were going to push him off. You remember that story? And then all of a sudden, just before he went off the cliff, he just sort of walked through the midst of them and left. Incredible escape. Of course, there was Daniel in the lion's den and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Stories, this Bible is just filled with stories of escapes. Samson's one of my favorites. Samson puts himself in a situation sort of like Houdini. You remember the story of Samson and Delilah? He said she was badgering him to tell him the secret of his great strength. And he said, well, if you tie me with 7 saplings, green saplings, and tie me up, and then I'll be just as weak as anybody. And so she fell for this. A lot of gullibility going on in these stories. It's hard I can't imagine what was going on in both of their minds, but so she'd tie him up in green saplings and then say, the Philistines are upon you. And then he said, what? And then he'd break the things like they were ropes of sand. There was nothing, and he'd break them and scare the Philistines. And then she would cry, and then he would say, okay, I'll tell you what it is. 7 ropes. If you give me with 7 new ropes, tie me up. So that she tied him up with 7 ropes while he was asleep. I don't know if he had to be asleep when she was doing this, I guess. This is one of the questions I got to ask when we get to heaven. I want to know how Samson was so gullible. Or what was going on? What's that? Yeah, there you go. I didn't want to say that from up here. You can say that from down there. Samson, well, she ties him up in 7 new ropes, and of course the Philistines come. She calls the Philistines. Okay, now he's weak, and so he just breaks them like they're nothing, like little strings. And then of course he probably wreaks havoc on the Philistines. But we're going to talk about my favorite escape in the Bible. It's Acts chapter 12. In fact, if you want to turn to Acts chapter 12. And we'll start with verse 1. This is the story of Peter escaping from jail. My favorite escape artist in the Bible, I think I'll join you down here. My favorite escape artist in the Bible is Peter. Peter already has a reputation of being an escape artist. We'll start with verse 1. It says, now about this time Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church. And he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. Now, James was the first apostle to die, wasn't he? It was about 13 years after the ascension of Christ that James was killed by the Jews and by Herod. It's interesting to note that his brother was the last one to die, wasn't he? His brother was John, right? The Revelator, the last disciple to die. In fact, the only one that would be considered not dying of a martyr's death. So Herod kills James with a sword. In verse 3 it says, and because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also.